I don't know if there's ever been a monster quite as disrespected by Monster Hunter as Monoblos. He's a creature with great cultural significance, seen as a rite of passage for a hunter to best. He stood as the final offline boss of the original Monster Hunter, due to the fact that he killed the wife of the Kokoda village chief, and this event forced the chief into retirement from hunting, in events that took place before the game's story. It's this event that relegated Monoblos to being a solo-only hunt. He is supposed to be this kind of ultimate test of mettle for a hunter. He might honestly be more relevant to Monster Hunter 1 in its narrative than Rathalos, the dude on the box. Several boxes, actually. And it's that specialness that kind of damned him. We haven't seen him for around 11 years at this point. Somewhere along the line, Diablos became the favored brother. The two-horned, nastier brute sibling has returned over and over and over, while Monoblos has languished in the background, only really getting his day in the sun back in 4 Ultimates. And since then, Monster Hunter as a series, especially the big numbered titles, have been pretty insistent on blending the single-player and multiplayer experience. See, as far as I'm aware, Monoblos has never been fought outside of single-player, not when he arrived, not in any of the first or second generation games, not in Frontier, and not in 4U. Maybe there's one little straggler outlier in, like, I don't know, DOS or something, but I'm pretty sure he's supposed to be single-player exclusive. And that's just kinda not how we do things anymore, at least not much. And you know what? That sucks, man. It really does. Monoblos is cool. Monsters with cultural significance are awesome additions to Monster Hunter, and there's criminally few of them, and most of these have regional cultural significance. Monoblos are culturally important to us as hunters. Yeah, as the games went on, the power levels of the monsters got nuts, and the Elder Dragons are really powerful and whatnot, so having a mid-level flying wyvern be the ultimate test could feel a little odd in that respect, but we're almost always kind of some super special, one-of-a-kind hunter in the main stories of these games. It's awesome to think of there being this monster equivalent to us, a cunning and dangerous swordsman beast out there in the desert that stands at the pinnacle of what most rank-and-file hunters could ever dream of achieving. I'm not even saying all of this to put down Diablos or anything. I think Monster Hunter has been better off with Diablos being such a major part of it, but I just think that it stinks that Diablos has completely eclipsed his more narratively ingrained brother, when I think the both of them deserve to be important and to be respected. In fact, I honestly think it'd be a better idea if Capcom didn't sideline Diablos for Monoblos' sake. If they did, I'm kind of confident that they wouldn't do as much as they could do to differentiate Monoblos from his brother, and you'd still just kind of have a Diablos again, but with a few AI changes and a couple of moveset differences. Monoblos wouldn't be as much his own thing, he'd be a stand-in. That's not what I want. With how modern Monster Hunter works, having both Monoblos and Diablos in the same game kind of means you have to make the two pretty varied to justify the both of them being in the same game, since monsters are just so much more expensive and resource demanding than they used to be. The degrees of separation, as well as assessments that really only come from Freedom Unite, have led a couple of people to believe that Monoblos is pretty much just a Diablos reskin at this point, who doesn't even need to return. And honestly, that's just not true. In fact, it's so not true that I don't even really need to make this video. Between 4 Ultimate and Frontier, there is a healthy divide between the Blos brothers. They are very much different combatants at this point. But you know what? I think we can go even further than what we have already available. I think we can make these two distinct at a level comparable to that of Uragan and Radoban. We have a few angles we need to attack today. First, we need to talk about reintegration of Monoblos and the challenges he faces due to his unique role in the series. Then, we're going to have to look at changes we can bring to his ecology and behavior now that he's going to be in games that like to visibly show off the day-to-day of the monsters. We're then going to need to look at versions of Monoblos that already have differences compared to Diablos and see what moves we can cherry pick and keep and alter and all that. And then we'll have some time to brainstorm up a couple of fresh new ideas to even further differentiate him from Diablos. So let's start with actually getting the big fella into a new game. How do we want to tackle this? The first and simplest option is irreverence. We could just bring Monoblos back and let him be a normal monster in normal multiplayer quests. It would stink to lose that unique part of his identity, but would that be the end of the world? Not really. He could still be a blast, and it wouldn't be the first time either, actually. Lunastra also used to be single player only, but that changed when she was reinvented, and that wasn't a problem for anybody. And, you know, we talk about Gormagala being beloved for being this apocalyptic cataclysm, infection-spreading monster, and how huge of an impact he had on the endgame of 4 Ultimate, but then you get into GU and Sunbreak and still kind of Wilds, and that aspect of him was completely absent in the gameplay, and no one really made that much of a stink about it, so there's some ground for leaving that interesting aspect of Monoblos in the past. But okay, so that's an option, but let's say we want to keep the single player only aspect around. It is a defining part of his history, and you know, it would suck to lose it. So what can we actually do here? Well, this is a more game-dependent argument, but we could just have him return in games that still have single-player and multiplayer separation. This would likely mean that Monoblos would be relegated to being a monster in the portable series, since the main numbered games are at this point very insistent on having the quest lines merged. Meanwhile, low and high rank Rise had separate village and hub quests. A more interesting option, I think, is to have Monoblos be a conditional spawn. Let's say we're working with Wilds specifically, with its giant ever-changing environments and random monster spawns in and out and all over the place, right? You could code it so that Monoblos will only appear if a hunter is alone, no one in their environment link or link party or any of that kind of stuff. And if you mark them as a quest target, you will be unable to fire the SOS flare and other hunters won't be able to join the quest. And if you do fire off an SOS flare and other hunters do come in or followers do come in, he'll automatically leave the zone. So you have to maintain the conditions. Your handler will then say something to the extent of, this monster is under certain guild protections and traditions. If you fight it, you have to hunt it alone. Something like that. Having Monoblos serve as this special, solo-mandated encounter may be a little contrary to modern Monster Hunter's design, but it certainly wouldn't break the game or anything. In all honesty, that might actually make him cooler than he was in the older games. He would go from just another village questline monster that simply didn't appear in multiplayer quests to a more enigmatic, rare spawn out in the living, breathing environments of the modern games. He would be this wandering Ronin who will only appear when the time is right. I think that's far and away the coolest decision to bring Monoblos back. Oh, and a little extra tidbit, since we're getting some deserved map music into proper flagship theme remixes in Wilds, let's give Monoblos a redone version of the Monster Hunter 1 Old Desert theme. Now for some behavioral adjustments. Monoblos hasn't been around for the 5th or 6th generation games at all, so now is the time for some new idle animations, some out of combat behaviors, and turf wars. Turf wars, right off the bat, are pretty much all gonna have to have different animations. Yeah, he is built super similar to Diablos in terms of body structure, but most of Diablos' turf wars use his 2 horns and rely on that horn structure. Obviously, Monoblos' horn count and structure are completely different, so a lot of the lifting and the bullfighting that Diablos can do isn't really going to work here. I'm not going to storyboard out a whole new list of turf wars or anything, but Monoblos is probably going to be wanting to go for feinting horn strikes and flanking charges against other monsters, baiting them into overextending before he goes in for one lethal stab, or a trampling charge, or a digging attack from underground. As for idle animations, you don't need to change too much. Diablos already doesn't have a ton of these. You could give him one where he's filing his horn down on like a rock or something to that extent, keeping his main weapon sharp. There's also the question of his diet, actually. As of right now, I think Monoblos is canonically said to eat cacti, much like Diablos does, though it has been pointed out that Monoblos' mouth structure doesn't really back that kind of diet choice. He's built more for chomping through tougher foliage. It'd be cool if they changed that around, as it would probably also give Monoblos some slightly different territory niches when compared to Diablos. But, you know, it wouldn't be the end of the world if they didn't make that change, right? It could just be kind of neat though. You know, say we have another map like the Wildspire Waste, where there's a small forested section with those tougher trees from him to get at with his beak, and Monoblos would go towards those wooded areas to eat, while Diablos would never go towards those areas, and he'd only exclusively stick towards the caves and the large arid desert regions. I think it'd be kind of fun. It would shed this light on how very slight evolutionary differences can result in animals with a lot of surface level similarities, but then a ton of behavioral micro changes and diet changes and stuff like that, that once added up make for 2 very distinct animals if you know what you're looking for. It's an idea that could further validate the 5th generation's decision to show off these monsters' behaviors out of combat and shed more light on them as animals. Okay, next, attacks. What are we actually dealing with here as a combatant? How different are Monoblos and Diablos nowadays? I mentioned earlier that with Frontier and 4 Ultimates, I almost don't even really need to make this video. But, let's reassess what we actually have here and see if all of these changes are worth keeping. So, first off in 4 Ultimates, what you'll immediately notice is Monoblos' dual horn uppercut charging attack. He pauses and shuffles forward in order to use his attack to pursue opponents as they retreat or change direction. It's a nice contrast from Diablos' huge wind-up wild horn swings. Fundamentally very similar attacks, but they use different angles and slightly different tactics and timings. On a more subtle end, Monoblos also has a flanking run, which is not an attack by itself, but what it's useful for is that he can immediately transition into other moves like his tailspin or his hip check or his horn thrust attack. He'll pick an attack based on which part of his body you're the closest to when he gets near. This is a tricky tool, simply because he will snap almost immediately into an attack out of what looks like a regular repositioning run, and he will be trying to hit your sides as well. In the 5th generation, Diablos has a sort of alteration on this ability, where he'll step in a quarter circle with his horns raised before swinging them in. It's a slightly more naturalistic animation, sure, but it's way less intimidating due to the lagging speed and obviousness of the attack coming at you. I think we can kind of best of both worlds this, where we keep the speedy full sprint of Monoblos' original spin, but have him raise his horn or his tail mid-run to show the attack wind-up like Diablos does. You could have a quick animation where Monoblos maybe has to dig his feet in to halt his momentum before he then rips the attack animation out as well. You'd have the same general running attack stance, but with some better animation telegraphing. Honestly, I think you could give this to both Monoblos and Diablos if they're in the same game, the trick being that they have slightly different horn thrusting attacks and you have to fight against your autopilot memory to react accordingly and match their specific timings. Also, worth mentioning that for you Monoblos digs less than for you Diablos, which makes sense because Diablos was given a lot of out-of-digging tools that Monoblos wasn't. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. White Monoblos is a funny case for me and for you. I haven't fought him since around when this game came out, so 10-11 years ago. So yeah, as is natural, right? My memory of his specifics have kind of faded with time. I did, however, never forget that I was afraid of him. That fact remained in my head. Doing research for this video has reminded me why. The guy gets a 40% speed multiplier when enraged, as well as a fast-acting U-turn animation where he can charge, drift out of that charge, spin back around to face you, and charge attack you again. And also, he is the originator of the bull charge, where he'll lower his head down and drag his feet before charging at you at top speed. Black Diablos actually steals this attack in World and Iceborne, by the way. Honestly, you know what? I'm kind of cool with letting them both have it. Let it be this one uniting move held by specifically just the Bloss subspecies. I think that'd be kind of cool, honestly. I think you can keep all of this pretty much as is, even the speed multiplier, kind of. One of the things I miss most nowadays in this modern era is the monsters gaining really notable speed hikes when they're enraged. I think that's kind of an oversight I wish the modern games would rectify at some point. Maybe 40% is a little high, but I mean, I sure as hell remember that duel. Like I said, couldn't remember what 4U Monoblos did, but I knew I was afraid of it. I love that, make me scared. Why not? Also, that sharp U-turn did have a really good animation to it. Would work really nice against focus mode. Could honestly be a lot of fun to maybe like double perfect block off of a rampaging white Monoblos or something like that. Okay, so now what does Frontier bring to the table exactly? The hardcore forms of Monoblos and white Monoblos do get some pretty sick new attacks, and for the most part, they're not so over-the-top Frontier craziness that they would feel out of place in the main series. Let's take a look at hardcore Monoblos first. He's got this wind up into a large single hitting tail sweep. He'll lift a leg and look over his shoulder, and then he'll come whipping around. It's a solid attack with a good telegraph to it, and honestly, I'm perfectly fine with giving Monoblos attacks that aren't just more horn thrusts. Also, this repositions him a little bit more to your side and puts him in a kind of squat position. If we really want to be mean, we could give white Monoblos the ability to charge out of this tail swing, just because it's funny to scare the crap out of people. I was gonna suggest adding this tail sweep to his roster of potential moves when he's doing his flanking run charge like we were talking about earlier, but That would mean that White Monoblos, in this hypothetical rework, would be able to do a full-on flanking sprint into a gigantic tail sweep, which he would then be able to swing through, squat, charge out of, and then, because it's White Monoblos, he could potentially U-turn into another charge out of that. I mean, hey man, I ain't a bitch. You a bitch? I'm not. That doesn't sound horrifying at all. Good lord. Oh my god, that'd be demonic. That'd be horrifying. Low-key, I'm gonna be real. As I write this, I'm kind of selling myself on that idea. Okay, and as I'm writing this is actually like I went and wrote more script and came back to write this chunk. I'm returning to the idea. I'm kind of sold on it. Do it. Put it in. I ain't a bitch. Are you? Sticking with the Frontier Monoblos then, he also has this combo where he'll either idle or walk in place for a second before doing a 0 wind-up instant charge, diving lunge thing, and then he does that same attack, sometimes 3 times in a row. It sucks. It's stupid. There's no wind-up, he just idles and borderline materializes in the air, lunging at you, and then spams that attack over and over again. It barely even has anything to do with Monoblos. Sometimes he doesn't even idle before the attack at all. He just does it. He's just lunging at you. Great, that's awesome. Super easy to react to. Great, cool, thanks guys. You can get this attack out of here, it sucks. He can also do this attack where he'll slam his chin down before violently swinging the horn up in one giant thrust. That's a multi-hitting attack too. The chin hit can make impact on you. I think that's kind of cool because if, again, we're in something like Wilds, it means that you're probably going to want to be careful and not perfect blocking off of the initial hit because then you're going to get smacked by the follow-up thrusting attack. I think it's kind of cool to punish lazy uses of those attacks and actually make you think about which moves you're actually throwing your counters out against. I think that's pretty solid design for tougher monsters in a game like Wilds. I think you could also totally have it so that the chin slam only staggers but keeps you in a standing position, which means you have a decent chance of being stabbed on the uppercut unless you're at a bad angle for that hitbox to actually hurt you. I'm thinking something else we could do with this attack if we really want to have fun with it is to have Monoblos potentially be able to cancel his double horn thrust sweep from 4U after that first swing and then go into this attack off the second move. The telegraph for this attack is also nice and large, so it would be far from unfair, but I can imagine it might be kind of fun to scramble someone's autopilot brain and make him panic doing something like this. And finally, Monoblos has an animation where he'll spread his wings, rear up, and bellow before sprinting, hacking, and slashing rapidly with his horn as he gradually digs himself into the ground. He can also run at a curved angle, tracking hunters that he's actively chasing. He will eventually fully descend and then perform a normal emergence from a dig. This attack might seem like a lot, because it hits multiple times, and it's pretty large. It's a little like Eukomlos' shark fin attack that he has. But it's also probably his single biggest windup, so you do have some time to sheath and run if you want to. But what you really should be doing is getting off to his sides or under and behind him, because that'll be safe as well. He can't turn harshly enough to hit you if you get, like, right at his flank. Now, okay, so what if when White Monoblos does his U-turn, he could cancel that second charge out of the U-turn, go into the bellow, and then do the horn thrust dig thing out of his second charge instead. I might be having too much fun writing this script, honestly. I'm just making him mean. I'm just doing it. Now, okay, let's look at White Monoblos in Frontier. Honestly, you know what? I've made this hypothetical new White Monoblos an insane psycho monster already. Why stop now? Let's just triple down on it. So, first things first, White Monoblos in this game can cancel his charge attacks into a shoulder barge. Tripling down, boys. Tripling down. Okay. Okay, alright. Realistically, this might be a little bit too much tech to stack on just White Monoblos' charging, but it's simultaneously super funny to think about the amount of potential stuff he could do to get into or cancel out of his charges and mix up and throw things around and all that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, As a guy who loves monsters that use mix-ups, I would adore the concentration that you would need to deal with White Monoblos in this scenario due to the insane mind games he could potentially throw at you. I love modern Gold Rathian, and this sounds like an even better version of her potentially. Also worth mentioning is that this shoulder check is a properly telegraphed attack. White Monoblos will lower his head, duck it to the side, and turn his body before checking. It's a slightly different timing. It'll hit you a little bit later than the normal charge does, but you can definitely see it coming. This move pairs interestingly with another attack that White Monoblos has in this game, where he can shove his whole head into the sand and uproot a giant pillar of rock. You would be tempted to use this rock to bait his charge attack so he can get his horn stuck and attack him for free. And this can happen. Alternatively, what he can do is White Monoblos will use that shoulder bash cancel, go through the pillar, and cause it to explode, which will deal damage to any hunter who's touching that pillar. This is a super cool combination of abilities and displays ingenuity and intelligence that I think works pretty cool for Monoblos, having him be the smarter of the two Bloses. Now, the move is kind of goofy. I think the idea that it's going for is that he is scooping up those rocks with his frill. With the animations being typically more naturalistic in the newer games, this is a little hard to justify. Maybe if they made the animation take a little bit longer, really showed him straining to rip the rock up, I could buy it a little bit more. If you made the pillar maybe a tad thinner and shorter too, I think we would have a variation of the attack that requires less suspension of disbelief. I think you could code White Monoblos to exclusively or near exclusively cancel into the hip check when he's near that pillar, just to make sure that he's not leaving himself open to getting stuck constantly. The only thing I would enhance about this move is give it shrapnel a little bit more range when the pillar breaks. Honestly, with Frontier, I'm kind of surprised this move doesn't have much more of a radius to it. I think what you could do is have it buckshot little rock bits in the same direction that Monoblos hit the pillar in an attempt to punish those who are cowering behind it. And then finally, you have this attack where White Monoblos will rear up and angle his head down before violently digging downwards. When he does this, he will first partially erupt out of the ground, knocking hunters into the air. He will then dip back down before fully erupting out of the sand and hitting hunters that are up in the air. Frontier has a few monsters with air juggle combos like this, where the monster will throw out one attack that will put you in a very specific airborne state before he will follow up with a different attack, and that will be a guaranteed hit. It can lead to a lot of two-hitting insta-death combos, honestly. They're really dangerous in this game. To be fair though, this isn't really a thing that any other Monster Hunter game has ever used outside of some pin attacks that have scripted follow-ups to them. Additionally, I think I'm pretty set on having Diablos being the Blos with more digging options and tools out of both of the Blos species, and sticking this on our new White Monoblos could maybe create a little bit of identity overlap. I think we're okay to leave this move behind, especially with all the other stuff I've been giving White Monoblos in this video. Its animation also doesn't really make a whole ton of sense either. It's a cool attack for sure, but I think its identity is pretty firmly rooted in how Frontier works. So that's my ideas for the reintegration of Monoblos' moves from For You and Frontier, how they would flow together and how they would be translated for a modern entry. Honestly, I think we could be done right here. This is definitely enough, and we usually don't have monsters at this tier of power having like 50 different attacks or whatnot. We don't want to stack things up too much, right? We've basically solidified Monoblos as the cunning, fast-acting mix-up master of the Blos species. But here's the thing. Do we still want to invent anything brand new for a modern Monoblos? What we have for Monoblos already has so much tech for combo canceling and mix-ups that I don't think we really need to push that angle too much further. I don't think we need to add too much more from what we have either, so I just have like a couple of quick ideas. One thing I think we might be able to toy around with a little is an idea I've seen floated around that if perhaps Monoblos returned, he could be kept a little bit skinnier, a little bit leaner, and actually use his wings. In modern times, Diablos has completely lost its very limited ability to fly. They were never aerial combatants, but he used to be able to fly out of pitfall traps or fly to leave a loading zone or something like that, and that simply does not exist period anymore. Bloses are meant to be entirely too heavy to fly. The wings are essentially decoration at this point, as they are descended from wyverns who could fly. I think we can maybe do a little bit with this idea though. Something super subtle. If we keep Monoblos a little bit skinnier, what we could do is give him a move or two where he can use some very limited propulsion with his wings to give him this ability to leap large distances. Not really fly and not even so much glide, but a little bit extra lunging power. Some kind of like short bursts of airtime. For example, you could maybe give him an alternate charge move, where he starts beating his wings mid-run, and partway through sprinting at you, he'll kick off and lunge at you, driving his horn forwards at high speeds as he glides for a couple of feet. Then following that up with a horn uppercut or something. I was also thinking you could do something like the retreating fly move that Rathalos has, where Monoblos will beat his wings ahead of him and push himself back and away from your melee range to create distance, which he can then use to follow up on with another charge or something like that. Something like that could just be really neat, giving him just a little teeny bit of airtime. Which honestly would be kind of unique, because if a monster flies in this game, they're usually pretty proficient flyers, but having a super limited ability to fly actually be integrated into the combat here could be pretty neat, honestly. I have one more idea for an attack to give White Monoblos. It's nothing super gimmick related, but I just think the animation would be kind of neat. It'd be kind of like a get off me, where if you're at his sides or at his tail, he would lower his head down to the ground, angle it to the side a little bit, then step, pivot, and very violently do a full 180-degree sweeping horn thrust, which ends in a heavy flourish upwards. Could be just a really stylish flank clearing tool. There's not too much else I really want to delve into here. There's only so many horn thrusts and tail slam attacks and digging moves that you can do before things start to just blend together. Monoblos is, by Monster Hunter standards, a pretty simple creature. You do have to keep his moveset physical. I was thinking about giving him kind of like a counter stance or something like that to give him a swordsman vibe, but I feel like at that point we might be stacking too many identities on him, and we should probably kind of have a more reined-in vision of him. Though, you know, if we wanted to take things in a completely different direction and a different hypothetical, a counter-based Monoblos could also be a really cool thing, but I think I like my mix-up version a little bit better. So, you know, there we have it. A new and improved Monoblos, reintegrated back into Monster Hunter, using his charges and his sprints to deploy a variety of options, each with clear tells, so that they'll be challenging to deal with, but fair, demanding your attention at all time and really paying attention to the subtleties of what he's doing. I think what we've done here is lock in Monoblos as a mind game playing mix-up artist. He'd be a monster that will demand focus and attention and in-the-moment decision-making with his charges and his horn sweeps, and they can be swapped around at any time when he's throwing them at you. Meanwhile, I would say Diablos in this hypothetical scenario would remain the more straightforward bruiser with the more involved and complex digging techniques. We aren't really examining Diablos here all that much, but it might be worthwhile, honestly, to give him some extra combo extensions in comparison to Monoblos. He can be the digging-oriented, brutal combo species, and Monoblos can be the charging-oriented, cunning mix-up species. Right there, I think we absolutely have a way to very cleanly separate the two. We can base their battle plans around those specific defining traits. This is already the direction 4U was kind of taking these guys, so I think by doubling down, we've nailed a way to differentiate them. This is a kind of funny video, honestly. A lot of this work was done for me by the different versions of Monoblos that exist, but I think in the threading together of ideas, this video has its own purpose and its own artistry to it. I think Monoblos deserves care and treatment of this kind of magnitude. He's an insanely important monster for the original game. Even if it would come in late, I think he does deserve to have a legacy akin to that of his brother. So tell me, what do you think? Did you like any of these ideas? How would you tune up Monoblos? And hey, if you want to hear more about the ecological changes and differentiations between Monoblos and Diablos and the importance of monsters having closely related species in these games, I made a video talking about the potentially unlimited ideas that having closely related monsters can bring to Monster Hunter and what a cool idea it was at the series' inception. You can check that video out right here. But for now, this has been CR-Volcanic or Connor. I'll see you around.